Welcome to the Backyard Bouquet podcast, where stories bloom from local flower fields and home gardens. I'm your host, Jennifer Galizia of the Flowering Farmhouse. I'm a backyard gardener turned flower farmer located in Hood River, Oregon. Join us for heartfelt journeys shared by flower farmers and backyard gardeners. Each episode is like a vibrant garden, cultivating wisdom and joy through flowers. From growing your own backyard garden to supporting your local flower farmer, the Backyard Bouquet is your fertile ground for heartwarming tales and expert cut flower growing advice. All right, flower friends, grab your gardening gloves, garden snips, or your favorite vase because it's time to let your backyard bloom. Welcome back to the Backyard Bouquet podcast. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce a very special guest, my friend Heather Staten from Heather's Flower Farm. Nestled in the stunning Hood River Valley, Heather has turned her passion for gardening into a flourishing flower farm that spans an acre on her family's 18-acre property. From her first row of zinnias as a little girl to now growing over 250 varieties of flowers and foliage, Heather's journey is a testament to her love for the earth and the magic of cultivation. At Heather's Flower Farm, sustainability isn't just a buzzword, it's a way of life. Heather and her family use no-till techniques and natural fertilizers to enrich their soil, ensuring that their fields are not only bursting with blooms, but also buzzing with life, from bees to beneficial insects. What's truly special about Heather is her commitment to reducing the floral industry's carbon footprint, providing locally grown flowers as a beautiful alternative to imported blooms. Along with her husband, Ben, who crafts the farm's infrastructure, and their children, Lottie and Jake, who are hands-on in the field and design, Heather's Flower Farm is a true family endeavor. So whether you're a floral enthusiast or someone who's passionate about sustainable agriculture, you're in for a treat today as we dive into Heather's world of flowers. Heather, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you share your story and insights with us today.
Thanks, Jen. I'm thrilled to be here. You are one of my oldest flower friends, and you know I love talking about flowers, so this is going to be a fun talk.
This is going to be so fun. And for all of you joining us today, I know you can't see us, but Heather and I are sitting next to each other at my dining room table because we live about 15 minutes from each other. So this is going to be really fun to chat with an old friend and fill you guys in on Heather's story and how she got started. So Heather, if you don't mind, can you tell us, how did you fall into flower farming?
No, I was an avid gardener for many, many years. My parents always had big vegetable gardens. And then my mother-in-law is English, and I spent some time living in England. And you know, the English are just amazing gardeners, and I was very inspired by her. And so I always had gardens around the house. And then at a certain stage, I decided I liked having flowers in the house, but I didn't like cutting them from the landscape because then I would have holes left. And was just sort of Googling cut flowers and discovered Floret and fell down the rabbit hole of cut flower farming. I bought Aaron's original book, 8 years ago, started with a few rows of cut flowers, and every year have just gotten bigger and fell down. And now I have a kind of full-time business growing and arranging cut flowers. It's, as you know, a thing that is easy to become passionate about. It's there's something about handling flowers, growing flowers that just lights me up. It really fulfills me. So
it really does. I've talked with so many guests about how flowers really feed our soul. And I'm not sure whether we're feeding people's souls more or we're feeding ourselves, or maybe it's both. But there's just something really magical and special, and the bonds we create in this industry, just like we're sitting here having our tea and coffee and getting to chat about flowers. I mean, how special is that? So did you start with an acre of flowers, or when you finally went down that rabbit hole?
No, this is the 7th year, and the first year was just a couple rows. It was 20 plants of this and 20 plants of that. And even that gave me more flowers than I needed for myself. And so I had a little bouquet subscription with 10 friends that I delivered to once a week. And then every year since then, it's expanded. And now it's an acre under production.
Which is a lot.
And especially as intensely as we grow, we do a lot of succession planting and interplanting. And I have very, very tiny pathways because I just need room for all the flowers. It is crammed in there. We grow a lot.
I've seen your space, and you really do cram a lot, which I think was an inspiration for me as we were downsizing our farm and just having to use what we have this year on a quarter acre. And it made me realize, okay, Heather has really tiny walkways. I can squeeze through some pretty tight spaces here.
Yeah.
So I've definitely narrowed my pathways after seeing your space. So what is your business model? Where do your flowers go now?
So we are about maybe 60% weddings and events. And then the remainder, I have a 50-person bouquet subscription.
Wow.
And then do a little bit of farmer's market in the off-season months in the wintertime. And then I've got a little local organic grocery store that we sell bouquets to.
That's a lot of channels that you're managing. Do you do that by yourself?
No, I've got a couple of part-time employees. I do rely on my family a lot, who are really good sports in encouraging me. It's at that level. It does. You couldn't do it yourself.
You drive yourself into the ground.
especially the weddings. You need to have like a lot of hands on deck. And for the weddings, I also I utilize my farmer friends too, because I can't. If it's a really big wedding, I can't grow enough for that. So I've bought dahlias and other things from you. Yeah.
Which is awesome. And I appreciate that you stick with the local flowers versus using something imported. Yeah. You've always been really good about calling and asking what I have that goes with your palettes. Yeah. So you said 50 to 60% of your business is weddings. Mm-hmm. About how many weddings do you do a year?
Last year I did 40, which was too many.
That's a lot.
Yeah. I was at the end of my rope by the end of last year. So I'm doing less, but sort of bigger or more intentional this year. I'm not saying yes to everything.
So when you do the weddings, are you just providing buckets to the clients, or what do your wedding packages entail as a flower farmer? Or you're more of a flower farmer florist, mm-hmm. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I do some DIY buckets. I also do what we call a la carte weddings, where people will order off a list of arrangements. I want a bridal bouquet and 3 boutonnieres, and pick those up at the farm. And then we also do full service weddings. And my intent is to do more full service, because I really love the floristry part of it, and the place where you can most express your artistry and create a complete sort of floral vision, and really let your imagination kind of run wild, is in the full service weddings. I think you've got the most opportunity that way. They're also the most work, because you have the installation and the breakdown, and it's a lot of time away from the farm, but they're the things that I get most excited about.
That's really neat. Now, how did you get started with the weddings? Because weddings demand a lot. I was a wedding photographer for many years, so I've seen the other side of the weddings, of capturing all the details. And as the farmer-florist, there's a lot of work that goes into making those weddings beautiful for the photographer to photograph, or the guests to enjoy. So how did you get started with weddings?
Well, I definitely took classes. It was not a field that I knew about. And there's a lot of technical things on weddings that you don't necessarily think about. But, it can be really hot here in the summertime. And so selecting the correct blooms for dealing with the weather conditions, or the thing that's classic in the gorge as we're sitting here looking out on a really windy day.
It's so windy.
It's so windy here. And, you've got to pick the right kind of vases and stabilize things so that, I've got to say, like early on, I had a wedding where I was watching all the bud vases on the tables flop over. And there's nothing more unnerving than watching vases, tumble over. It really, it ruins your day for sure. But you don't make that mistake more than once.
Yes, most mistakes in farming you make one time and you learn your lesson. I know it's interesting that you say that, because when I was the wedding photographer, I got the other perspective. And when a lot of times in a wedding, people will hire their photographer before anyone else. They get the venue and then they hire their photographer. And I would always, as a wedding photographer, tell the brides, hire a local wedding florist. And whether it's in the gorge or this applies to any area, I truly believe when you hire a local vendor, they know the conditions. Mm-hmm. For those of you listening who aren't familiar with the Columbia River Gorge, we're known as the windsurfing capital of the world. We have a lot of wind. I mean, there's been days where the wind has gusted to 50, 60 miles an hour. And as the wedding photographer, I would watch these tall 24-inch vases get picked up with the wind and shatter to pieces on tables. And those were the ones that were from out of area florists that had no clue about the wind conditions. And so that's a really great point about knowing the conditions that you're going into.
Yeah.
So I kind of diverged there, but I wanted to throw that plug. If someone's listening, because I know we do have some listeners that are growing flowers for their own weddings or wanting to get into the wedding piece of it. And so knowing, I think, what conditions are, it's beyond just what flowers are going to look pretty at the wedding, but knowing what needs to be provided so that the flowers are going to look their best and not topple over is very different than making a CSA bouquet.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And the difference between making a CSA bouquet and wedding flowers, this was something that I really learned. And you, I'm sure, have this experience too. For the CSA bouquets, you're trying to give your clients maximum vase life. And so you're cutting all your flowers very tight. And so they have the lovely experience of watching them open and having a week or 10 days of flowers. On the wedding side, you want everything completely open at its maximum beauty. And so it's a really different mindset of for the wedding flowers, I'm really babysitting those flowers for the whole week before the wedding, getting them just the right stage of openness. Are they too open? If they're opening too much, get them back in the cooler, back and forth until they're just at exactly the right stage. I think that sometimes people don't realize how much goes into that kind of moment of perfection on a particular day. There's a lot to it.
It's kind of like ranunculus right now. I was talking with a florist just yesterday, and normally you open them up in a smaller bud, but if you're delivering on a Thursday to a florist and they need it for a Friday wedding, those ranunculus need to be open when you deliver to them. And so if you're the farmer-florist, you're not only harvesting them, but you've got to get them to the right stage. What are some of the flowers that require the most babysitting for getting ready for a wedding?
I think roses, peonies, or peonies are one of those ones where you want them open, but they aren't the most long lasting, so you don't want them to blow too. I think tulips can be that way too. They go over fast when it gets hot. Yeah,
especially some of them that blow open so fast, like the exotic emperor.
Yeah,
that one blows open so quickly that I imagine it's a challenge. I've realized that I've done a few a la cartes, but I really like to just grow them and give the flowers to people like you so you can do the magic and arrange them, because there is so much babysitting of not the client, but the flowers.
Right. Yep.
So you mentioned you've done some training. What kind of training have you done?
I've taken courses with good floral designers who are wedding specialists. I actually just came back from an amazing class with Ariella Chazar and Max Giller, who are both kind of nationally or internationally known wedding florists. And it was so inspirational. But I think for anybody, I would say invest in yourself, invest in your own education.
I think that's such great advice. I love continually learning, especially in the floral industry. Things are changing. There's new trends or new styles or new ways of doing things, or things you just don't know. I did an arranging class last year, and it was amazing how much I can look back and see how far I've come.
Yeah.
Do you notice that when you attend, was this a workshop or an online class? What was it?
It was an in-person workshop. It was 3 days. So it was great. We got to do bridal bouquets and various arrangements and a giant installation and tablescapes and sort of like learning their thought process and their techniques. It was, it was hugely helpful.
And where was that class?
It was in the Bay Area. It was in Emeryville.
Okay. Yeah. So you flew down to California for that. Oh, fun. And do they use local flowers for those? I'm curious.
They do. And actually the class was amazing in that the San Francisco floral market is off the charts. And both of those two designers are completely committed to local flowers. And some of the other classes that I've taken have been more kind of just typical imported flowers. It's rare that I've been to a class where I'm handling flowers as pretty as the things that you and I grow. There is just something about local flowers that there's a life force to them. They're really special. So it was nice to be in a class where they also had, amazing clematis and dogwood and just things that you often don't see.
It is neat. There's such a difference in local flowers and those that are imported. Yeah. We have, obviously, where we are in the Columbia River Gorge, we're actually a huge wedding destination. One of our wedding venues was a top 5 wedding venue about 15 years ago, probably now. I remember it was right when I was first getting into wedding photography, and it's kind of what blew up the gorge for weddings and has helped so many local businesses really grow, even our floral businesses, because with Mount Hood, the river, it's just such a picturesque spot to get married, but we're not year-round weddings. So what is your wedding season? When does it start? When does it end?
It's sort of April to October.
Which is a long...
It is a long season. I normally have like 1 or 2 April brides. I wish there were more, actually, because they're gorgeous spring flowers. The problem here, I think, is just that the weather is iffy and everybody wants the outdoor beautiful views and all of that stuff. Yes. But yeah, so if there are any spring brides out there, contact me. I really want to do more spring weddings.
Well, and this last April, the weather was gorgeous. I mean, we had a pretty wet May, which is hit or miss, but April was beautiful. Stunning this year. Yeah. And we had almost no rain. I don't know if we had any measurable rain in April. So if someone's getting married in the spring in the Pacific Northwest, what are some local flowers that they could either, if for someone listening who's a farmer wanting to think about growing next year, or someone who's listening that's going to be getting married next spring, what are local flowers that could be incorporated in the spring weddings?
Well, there would be tulips and daffodils. There's a lot of flowering branches. So peaches and apple, and there's a very early spirea that's lovely. And then other sort of forced bulbs like Spanish hyacinths I've been really into recently. I think they're really pretty. Muscari. There are a few like Linaria. There are a few other perennials that are very early, but especially then you have ranunculus and anemones in the hoop house. But yeah, there's a beautiful assortment. And the tulip assortment particularly, there's so many, as you know, varieties of doubles and parrot tulips, just so romantic.
They're so beautiful. And I mean, some of them look like peonies. Yeah. Almost like I had someone pick some up for a wedding this year and they said, "Are you sure these aren't peonies?" And I'm like, "No, they're tulips."
Yeah.
Okay, so we have the spring brides, and then May and June. I've always found that June it's a beautiful month to get married in the gorge, but I always struggle as a flower farmer being able to offer a bunch of flowers because I feel like I'm kind of in a transition period. What do you do?
It can be it can be a kind of dead month in a way. And the strategy that I've adopted is growing a lot of perennials. And I had 2 weddings pick up this week. And 10 days ago, I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I promised these people flowers. I'm not going to have anything. And there was another flower farmer who has a saying, trust the field. And it's true. If you've got a lot of stuff out there, the field will deliver. It's hard to have confidence, but it will. And so like right now, I've got maybe 5 different kind of columbines. They're
Oh, I
so
love
pretty,
columbine.
so pretty. Um, Alliums are coming in now. Lots of gorgeous geum. So actually, my peonies have just started, but even without the peonies, um, ranunculus, anemones, there's a ton of stuff, but it really is relying on the perennials and some early kind of biennial type things to get you through May and June.
And how long do you hold your peonies out of curiosity? Can you, because if they start blooming in May, can you still have your peonies in June?
Yeah, I mean, I probably hold them 2 or 3 weeks. I've definitely done them longer. For a wedding, if you've got a
Mm-hmm.
really cold cooler, you could probably do a month or 6 weeks. I haven't quite pushed it as far as that. I also just kind of go through them a little bit faster than that. But every year is a little bit variable because I've finished picking the coral charm peonies in the last couple of days. I've sort of they're done. But last year I had a May 30th wedding that I had promised peonies for, and we didn't have anything. I had to find a Willamette Valley grower, which is a warmer climate than we have,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to fulfill that wedding. So every year is a little bit different.
We were
Yeah.
really late
We
last
were
year.
so late last year.
And then it got so hot.
Yeah.
Because I remember I was planting dahlias, trying to harvest peonies, and it was like 95 degrees outside.
Yeah.
So yeah, every year is really different. And this year we're getting, I think we're kind of lucky because it's in the 60s right
Yeah.
now. I'm having to look at my clock here. It is the middle of May because this will launch right towards the end of May, this
Right.
episode. So we've talked about spring flowers, May and June. What about kind of the peak of summer? What flowers do you like to use in weddings for local flowers?
Well, it will be a lot of dahlias. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I planted a bunch of garden roses over the last 2 years. So hopefully this year they'll be coming into production. I do a lot of lilies. And those you're able to succession plant those so you can have them over a couple month period. And then the kind of the normal summer things, cosmos and zinnias, marigolds. Yeah.
And what about fall? So is that your dahlias? Do they start in October? I can't talk here. Do your dahlias start in August? Is that
They
what you typically?
do. I think people always think of them as like like, I don't know, midsummer plant, but they're not really. They're really kind of Indian summer into fall. And a lot of times for me, they're looking their very best, like around the beginning of October, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
Last year, October was when they were really at their peak for me.
Yeah.
So it is interesting because I always have to remind myself I'm so excited to see them. In other parts of the country will get their dahlias sooner.
Much earlier. Yeah. Yeah.
Unless you leave them in the ground, like in Portland, I know if people leave their dahlias in the ground, which is only an hour from here, but they're so much warmer than us that they get their dahlias so much sooner.
Yeah. And then I do a ton of lysianthus. That's the other thing that gets me through August and September, and those are gorgeous.
Which are amazing for weddings.
They are amazing.
They're expensive. Do you grow those from seed or plug?
Plug. Yeah.
They just take up too much space.
Yeah.
And so then fall, you also go into fall until we have our frost is always unpredictable. We can have it, I think the earliest I've recorded in my notes was end of September.
Yep.
And we've gone into November. So how do you well, first let's ask, what do you use in the fall for your wedding bouquets?
So the dahlias are continuing. I've gotten really into chrysanthemums in the last couple of years, and they will bloom over maybe a 2-month period. And there is something about getting a new flower at the end of September that just, it's exciting. It's all, for me, I'm always the flower I like best is always the new thing. But I think by the time you're getting to the very end of the season, you've seen everything a lot, you're getting a little jaded, and then to have these new beautiful things, it just perks me up again.
Yes, it's so nice to see them. And you grow some really beautiful varieties. Do you have any favorite mums?
So yeah, I really like Pat Lehman. There are a bunch of ones that have funny, like football names,
Yes.
like Homecoming, Cheerleader, Stadium Queen, that I think are bred from Minnesota or something. They're supposed to be cold, hardy varieties.
Okay.
But they're really good. I also grow some of the King's Mums heirloom ones that are really cool, or have like Japanese breeding, Spider Mums. Yeah.
Awesome. And do you grow those outdoors or in a hoop house?
I grow those in a hoop house. And so the way I manage the hoop is that in the springtime, it's all ranunculus and anemones. And then probably in the next week or two, all of those will come out and we'll have almost entirely mums. I've got some scented geraniums. I'm growing Tweedia for the first time. So those will also go in the hoop.
Oh, nice. Okay. And before I talk about your hoop, I'm curious, when you're planning out weddings, because the frost date is always unpredictable, do you just choose like a certain time that you finish weddings for the season as a local grower, or how do you determine?
I do. I feel pretty comfortable. Like the first week or so of October, I'm pretty comfortable with that. I don't go much later than that. Yeah.
It's always hard because we can sometimes have such beautiful Octobers, but I'm really nervous to commit to flowers.
But also the production goes down as we start to have less light. You don't have as much volume either in later October. Yeah.
That's a great point. And the weddings tend to dwindle also naturally because of the weather. It's less predictable, and people want those outdoor Mount Hood views for their weddings here. I do want to ask you about your hoop house, but before I go there, I want to talk about sustainability in the wedding industry as a florist. You don't use any floral foam.
No. Yeah. I think there's a strong and established movement to be foam free. And you can almost always, so floral foam or like Oasis is a product that's, full of, made of sort of petrochemicals, and it's nasty to handle. It just goes in the landfill. I also think that arrangements in it can look a little stiff because you're sticking stems into a very precise position. And, I do want to position stems, but I think we normally will use chicken wire and provide actual water sources. And I think flowers, they would rather be in water than in foam.
Yes.
And using chicken wire or other armatures, like a pin frog or something, I think the flowers they also look more natural. They're a little more, they have a little more movement to them. They're not so stiff. So I think sort of both from an aesthetic and a sustainability viewpoint, they're easier. And then like on the cleanup side, if you're taking down a big arch or something, if you're just pulling things out of chicken wire, everything can go straight into the compost, nothing in the trash. Yeah.
That's a great point too. I didn't think about that, about the flower piece of it, because otherwise you're putting that floral foam into the compost, or when it usually just goes straight into the trash and then goes to the landfill or ends up in the ocean and doesn't really break down. Yeah. So I know it's always discouraging when I go to the Portland flower market and I see so much foam still there. And I'm not trying to get political or anything here, but I commend you that you are foam free and you put such an emphasis on really finding alternative methods. And the chicken wire, I think, is pretty commonly used with Farmer-Florist anyways, but it's such a great thing. I mean, you can reuse it and shape it. And I took a course or a workshop 2 years ago now, and it's amazing how much I now find myself using the chicken wire. I'd never used the foam before that, but having something to give your flowers a base versus, because before that I actually unfortunately used just the floral tape.
Made a little grid.
And made a grid, but the chicken wire gives you so much more to work with, because especially if you fold it over 2 or 3 times, you have several layers in your compote or bowl or whatever you're using. And it really provides such great support for your flowers, but also gives that movement that you were talking about. So I think that's great that that is something that you really focus on and prioritize. You have a hoop house that you built how many years ago now?
I think 4.
It was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
Did you get a grant for that?
I didn't, and I wish I did.
Okay.
That was just being an amateur. That was thinking like that it was going to be too much work or too complicated. And that's not the truth. I think they're easy to get, and lots of our friends have gotten them. So if I build another one, I definitely will get a grant.
That's something that is a goal of mine when we find new land, is to get a grant for a hoop house, because I think it's really great that the government provides that assistance and help for flower farmers and farmers in general.
And it's really transformative to have one. There's so many different ways that you can use it to extend your season.
Yeah, because you can start, that's what we should talk about. Did you force your tulips in the hoop house?
I did some in the hoop house. So my big discovery in the last year is how much you can manipulate your tulip harvest, to have them over a really long period. You could probably have tulips over a 6-month period.
Wow.
If you wanted to. So I grew some indoors hydroponically, and that gave me tulips in January and February. And then I had planted a bunch of tulips in crates, and they spent their winters outside. And tulips are really easy to force. So if you bring them into a warm, lighted area, once they've had most of their winter cooling, they will bloom 2 weeks to the day from the time you bring them into a warm area. So I have a little heated space. So I would bring crates in. So in March and April, I had those. And then sort of April and into May, had tulips in the hoop house or out in the field. And you can also manipulate tulips to bloom a little later by putting them in shady areas. So like the last week or 10 days of tulips were things that I intentionally put in areas that just didn't get as much sun. And that's actually an awesome trick, because you also, like with a lot of things, if you provide a little bit of shade, you'll get taller stems. Yes. So that's kind of cool to know.
I grew all of mine in the shade this year because I was worried with them in the crates and not having a great water source. I didn't want them drying out super fast. And my stems were so long on some of the varieties, like Menton and Gudashink were 3+ feet long. It was crazy.
Neat, isn't it? Yeah,
it's really cool. Amazing. Now, you grow your tulips in crates. And how many did you grow?
I grew about 8,000 last year, or this spring. But I think I'm going to grow more like 10 next year, because I had the same problem that I've had every year, which is I ran out of things for Mother's Day, because where we are, really, tulips are the best option for Mother's Day flowers, for a focal flower. And I had sold out of things maybe like a week before Mother's Day. So I need to plant more.
That's a lot of tulips. Do you harvest them by yourself, or you have farm help at that time?
I have farm help, yeah.
But still, I mean, I did 4,000 this year, and it was just me processing them.
Tulips are a very nerve-wracking plant, because they go so fast. You have to pick them when they're just showing color. If you ignore them and try and come back in the afternoon, then they've opened up and you can just throw them away because you've missed your opportunity. I always think that like getting them in the cooler is like putting them in the bank, but it's that whole time of the couple months of tulip harvest. Yeah, it's a little intense, especially if you have a warm day.
Yes. And we had a couple warm days. I feel like they almost broke me this year, because I was trying to also get my seeds going and everything I started so many seeds late because it was nonstop tulips coming on it felt like it was over, literally everything bloomed in a 2-week period for me, because I didn't have space to control when they were blooming. So the trickling out, And so it was all at once. And then the cooler was overflowing. I have 2 coolers. So I've got a small cooler where I was putting all the tulips, and then my main walk-in cooler is full of dahlia tubers, but that's at 45 degrees. So I couldn't put the tulips in there. How do you store your tulips?
I mostly take the bulb off, and I will store them flat in crates.
Do you wrap them up or just put them in the crate?
I do. So I put them in like brown paper, and I'll do I'll bundle them in 10 stem bunches just to make it easy for me to count. And I'll use the bulb crates that we buy the bulbs in for storage, and then I'll stack them up, and they're all labeled. And Yep. And then if your cooler is nice and cold, so I kind of keep mine 35 or so for tulips.
That's what I do too.
They last beautifully. They last awesome.
How long do you store yours for? What's the longest you've pushed it?
Probably a month. Yeah. And that would be like if I was going to so I actually have a little graduation party event this weekend that I use some tulips that are pretty old, but I just hydrated them today and they look awesome. So
oh, great. So they only need to look good for a day.
They need to look good for a day. Yeah. I wouldn't probably, if I kept it a month, I wouldn't want to sell it to a bouquet subscription client who's expecting to get a week out of it. But for an event, it would be just fine.
So tell me about your subscriptions with your CSA. How many CSA subscriptions do you do a year?
So I like to do 50. So I'll deliver 2 different days with 25 on each day is kind of the plan.
And do you do just one subscription for the whole season, or do you break it up?
I break it up. I do a spring one that's 4 weeks. So that's kind of the tulip subscription when people are really hungry for flowers. And then I do a main season one, which just started this week, which is with the second week of May. And there's often a little gap between the spring one ending and the sort of summer one going. And the main season one is 20 weeks. And
oh, wow.
Yeah. So I would say most people, 3/4 of my people buy the whole season. And then I also sell it in 4-week chunks. So I have a certain number of people who pop on for 4 weeks and, pop off. Yeah.
That is a lot. So you have 24 weeks of CSA subscriptions throughout the year.
Yeah, it is a lot. And part of our thing is that every week should be different. Like I don't really like to repeat flowers very much, or if I'm going to repeat something, it'll be a different one. So they will get sunflowers more than one time, but maybe they'll get white light, that sort of pale yellow variety. And then in the next time, a month or 6 weeks later, they might get a more traditional, orange one with a brown center. I like it for the mood to be really different. So they might get, pale pastels one week, and then they might get bright colors the next week. Because I'm trying to sort of show them the season through flowers. And I think that the people who buy the whole shebang really get to feel what it's like to be kind of at the farm and see the different flowers. They change all the time, that the May flowers are so different than October ones, but I think they connect the person to the season and the land in a way that I think customers really appreciate. They really appreciate just kind of getting to be in touch with the season through flowers.
That's really neat. And that's a lot of work. So 50 bouquets a week for 24 weeks, twice a week. Are you the one that's making these bouquets, or who makes the bouquets?
There's almost always somebody with me. Yeah.
And how
used to be my daughter.
And is she still involved with the farm?
I don't think she's going to be this summer. She's graduating college, so I think she's going to get a real job. Yeah, but I do have some wonderful employees. Yeah, and we do a recipe, right? So the first year that I did a CSA, I did that every bouquet is different, and everyone took me like 25 minutes to make, and just I was losing my mind. But now it's definitely, it's 4 of this and 3 of that. And we line them up and you walk down the line and you build the bouquet. So we can be fast.
How long does it take you to make a bouquet?
For the CSA? For one, I don't know, maybe a minute or 2. It's not super long.
So you're really efficient.
We're pretty fast. Yeah.
And what goes into your ingredients on your CSA bouquets? Do you kind of follow a recipe of a focal flower, and then?
I generally will have a focal and then some amount of foliage, and the things that I really like are, I call them the jewelry, the little whimsical fun things. And so the week that we just had, we're into the last of our tulips, and then I had snowball viburnum as my kind of foliage, and I also had some euphorbia. But the things that to me really made the bouquet were, we had lovely orange geum, which is super cute, and had a columbine. And then there's a plant called Linaria. It looks like a kind of a baby snapdragon.
Yes.
Yeah. So, the kind of little extra things are, to me, the things that connect to the season in a way. And also that aren't traditional florist plants that just feel to me like more special. I feel like for our bouquet subscribers, they get like just a lot of like really interesting things. Yeah.
So you must grow a lot of different types of plants.
I do. And people always advise not to do that you should, do less. And I think that from a business and a sanity sense, that is awesome advice. It is exactly the advice I would give too. But I like plants. I like new plants, and I like a lot of variety. I've got a short attention span. And so I want to be excited all the time with something new and different. And I'm 56 years old, and I'm running my own business, and I can run it however I want. And I don't think it's the most like profitable or sensible way to do it, to grow a lot of different things, but it's the thing that kind of lights my fire. So I'm doing it this way.
Well, I know, I think it was Marin from the Farmhouse Flower Farm. She was the first one on the podcast that said, grow what brings you joy. And it sounds like that's exactly what you're doing, is you're choosing the flowers that you find joy in to grow. And then you're sharing that joy with your CSA and your wedding clients and everyone that purchases from your farm.
Yeah.
And for your business model, it works. For me, I'm focusing on really trying to hybridize dahlias. So I'm niching down on growing really less so I can be really good at it. But you're offering these beautiful CSA bouquet subscriptions and these full service weddings where if you only had dahlias, you wouldn't be able to offer the full service weddings. So I think what I love about getting to talk to different guests is there's so many different business models. It's not like you say, I'm going to be a flower farmer and you have to do this. Yeah. It's like, I'm going to be a flower farmer, and then I get to choose like what brings me joy. And part of it's that experimentation you mentioned in your first year. You grew a whole bunch, but just a lot of little things. Is that when you didn't sell anything your first year, did you?
I did, but I was selling $10 bouquets to friends. So it was not much.
You didn't have huge commitments.
No, exactly. I wanted to make it, that year I decided to make it cheap enough that if I had a total fail one week, nobody would feel that bad about it. Yeah.
And I love that it started with friends. So friends are probably more encouraging and supportive, and they're cheering you on and excited to see what you're growing versus a business that is relying on a delivery or a florist. Yeah. I know a lot of people will go to a florist their first year and they're like, look what I'm growing. But if you if you don't know how it's going to perform, you don't know how long you're going to have
and how much quantity you're going to have and all of that stuff. Yeah, that would be hard.
Especially like once you're learning like what's a cut and come again versus a single use cut. Like if you go through everything in 1 week or you have a crop failure, you can't guarantee certain things. Yeah. So I think that's also a nice thing for you is if you have a crop failure in one thing,
I've got other things. I've got lots of backups. Yeah. And I will say like a big part of the sort of backbone of the business is perennials. And they're the thing that are the least amount of work. So we talked about columbines coming in right now. I do nothing to the columbines. I grew them from seed. They take a couple of years to flower, but I maybe weed their beds at the beginning of the season, and then I harvest them. And then apart from keeping them watered, I don't do anything else to them. They're like and the same with like the geum and a stilby is another one. Mm-hmm. They just come back, and the only thing I do is harvest them. And so that's compared to an annual where you're planting the seed and, taking care of it as a baby and all of the different steps. So
I think you're really wise to invest in the perennials because for your scale, if you only did annuals,
you'd go crazy.
Yes, you would go crazy. Because I've leased land, it's been harder for me to invest in a lot of perennials. And we're still in the search for those that have been asking. We haven't found our permanent new farm yet. And once we do, that will be one of the first things I invest in is adding perennials. Even though I'm trying to niche down on the dahlias, I still love things like the hydrangeas and 9 bark and those kind of things you can never have enough of that are the backbone. I remember a few years ago, did you go to Armitage in Eugene? Is that where you ended up? I remember. So for those that are in the Pacific Northwest, Armitage in Eugene has a great selection of perennials. And Heather shared with me, and I can't wait for the day that I can go and buy a whole bunch of them. You invested in perennials how long ago, would you say?
It was almost from the beginning, at least some. And I think like those like hydrangeas that you brought up are so great. They've got such a long season of harvest because you can pick them when, like the ones we mostly do are paniculata varieties, but they're when they're white and creamy all the way to when they're sort of rosy later in the season, and then even when they're dried. But you've got several months of being able to use them, and they're another one that you don't do anything to except harvest them.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then do you heavily prune them in the winter, or are they kind of already pruned because you've been harvesting?
No, I do a little prune in the,
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are your main perennials that you have on your property?
So I do have a bunch of woodies. And so right now, the woody that is most exciting is Bridal Veil Spirea. And there's like 3 different varieties, and every one of them is lovely. And I was just making a bridal bouquet with using them, and it's such a cheater flower because they drape beautifully. They're just this little white froth.
Our audience can't see, but there's one right in front of us.
Yes,
right
it's
here out
super
the window.
pretty. Yeah,
I love them.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great one.
Yeah,
I would have a whole bunch of those if I had more space. You also dry flowers, right?
I do, although I'm pulling back from that. Sometimes you also have to realize what you hate. And I like the look of dried flowers. I hate handling them. They are such a mess. Like when you're putting together bouquets, you're breaking things and it's dusty and the floor is covered with stuff. And I find it hard to charge as much as you should because they also shrink when they're dried. And they should be twice as expensive as fresh flowers because you've added a whole extra step of drying them, storing them, all of that stuff. So it is nice to have something to sell in the wintertime, but I definitely have a love-hate relationship with them.
Yes. Well, and you have such a long season. Do you ever have any downtime?
I do have downtime in the winter. I do. Although I do like to force some bulbs, in the winter. We'll do paper whites and amaryllis, but I do a lot of narcissus and muscari and things like that in the early spring, January, February, when I think having a little green thing in the house is very uplifting.
And you sell those at the farmer's market, right?
I do.
That's really neat. Yeah. And you're on 18 acres. Hopefully in the show notes, we can include a few pictures of your property. Heather lives on an absolutely dream property. She lives, my husband always says that road is his dream road to live on. She lives on the Hood River. So in Hood River, we have the Columbia River, which is the main river. And then we have the Hood River, which runs down from Mount Hood and flows into the Columbia. So you have this space kind of carved out on your property. I want to paint a picture for our audience where you have this beautiful 1 acre section where you have all of your annuals and perennials for your cut flower business. But you are surrounded by woods and you're pretty close to the national forest where you are.
Yep.
Do you ever do any foraging on your property?
I do, especially in the springtime when I'm looking for greenery to go with tulips. So I do a ton of snowberry is an awesome greenery. It's got really arching branches and the leaves are pretty durable. In the next week or so, we've got wild mock orange, Philadelphus. I always get some of that. I love actually big leaf maple. The sort of flower heads of big leaf maple are sort of pendulant and cool looking. That's another kind of early spring thing. Yeah.
Do you have any tips for anyone that's wanting to forage flowers?
I think you just need, if it's your own property, just go light. Like, don't cut something, if it's a bush, I will always say, never cut more than about 1/4 of it so that you want it to continue to thrive.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And you obviously have your own access, but if someone doesn't have access, there's rules that they need to follow for just going out and foraging in the forest, right? They have to have a permit. Is that?
I think in the national forest, I think you can get a permit to do some foraging. Yeah. And I don't think it's expensive, $5 or something, but you do need to follow the rules. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I don't want to encourage people to do something that's not supposed to be done.
Yeah.
Because of where you live, you also have lots of animals coming through your yard. Is that correct? Do you have deer and elk?
I do. And I've been really knock wood. I've been lucky on the deer, but I think my luck might be running out because I did plant these roses. And even though they've got, like you said, we're surrounded by wood that has wild roses in it, but they seem to think that the plant roses that I planted are tastier than, and so I don't have a deer. I haven't had a deer fence. I know a lot of farmers around here do.
Yes.
And I think that I'm going to have to break down and do it. It's really expensive.
Yeah. Well, because of where you are, I know we had looked at a property a couple houses down from you, and they had an elk fence that even had spots that was torn down, and it was 10 or 12 feet.
Oh my gosh.
Tall. I was doing some reading yesterday for someone in the Dahlia Patch, the online community that I run. They were asking me, they were confused between bone meal and blood meal. And as I was looking up blood meal, and I need to do a little bit more research, so I might be premature sharing this on here, but I did read online that it is a deer and rodent deterrent.
Oh, okay.
And so maybe you can experiment for us. And
that's a good idea. Yeah.
See if you can use blood meal, not bone meal, but blood meal as a fertilizer to help deter the deer, because online, I'd only spent about 10 minutes reading up on it, but it was saying that one of the benefits of blood meal was that it deters the deer.
Do you put it in the ground, or do you try and make a foliar?
It was in the ground. So instead of bone meal or like alfalfa or other kinds of fertilizers, when you're planting, you feed with the blood meal instead. And I know things like tomatoes do really well with the blood meal. So I thought that was fascinating, because as we're beginning our search for permanent land, almost everything in the Hood River area is around deer pressure. So I've been thinking, how am I going to keep deer away from?
Do the deer eat the dahlias?
We don't have deer pressure here.
I haven't noticed that. And
I'm going to knock on wood.
Yeah, they have a few things that they like, at least in my place, but the dahlias haven't been one of them.
Okay.
They like raspberries, which is kind of annoying because I grow raspberries for foliage.
Love raspberry foliage.
Yeah, they like that. And they seem to love eating the tips off roses, especially like rose buds. They just think are the most delicious thing ever. So that's irritating.
They do smell really good. But I wonder if the blood meal would work on that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. I know our time is getting close. I want to ask you some advice questions for those that are listening that are interested in adding, or if maybe they're already a farmer, but they're not a farmer-florist. What advice would you have for someone that's wanting to get into the more floristry side of the business?
To give yourself some time to do some creative practice. I know that it's with the actual farming, it's hard to keep up with just the planting and harvesting and stuff, but to really a couple of times a week, cut some flowers, take an hour and make an arrangement, and make lots of different kinds of things. So like decide you're going to spend, an hour making 3 kinds of boutonnieres, or just like the more that you can handle things, the better. I think that one of the wonderful things about growing the flowers that you're going to use in arrangements is it really inspires your floral arrangements. And part of it's just like kind of that thing from the food world, what grows together goes together. And I've seen lots of like flower associations that I might just have 2 buckets of flowers next to each other in the cooler, and I never thought about putting them together, and I see them next to each other and it's like, those colors are beautiful together, and that might inspire an arrangement to sort of mess around with. I really love color, and so to like try lots of different color schemes. So good, but I think it's very easy to not nurture your creative self.
I love that. That's a goal of mine this summer, not just, well, not for the weddings, but just in general, of give myself that permission or time to be creative, because it's amazing what you can come up with when you're not under stress and not under pressure and not having to deliver something, and you just can play. Last summer, Olivia and I my daughter and I did a video for an educational content that hopefully is coming out this summer. It's just a quick little piece for Bloom TV and PBS. And it was so fun because they asked her, and she's 9, what do you love most about when you have flowers? And she said, I like that I get to be creative and no one tells me what I have to do.
Oh, that's so nice.
And it stood out to me of the, like, here's this 9-year-old with these wise words, realizing that when no one's putting any pressure on you, you have this full freedom to be creative. And so I think that's really beautiful advice you gave us. I know what I was going to ask you earlier that I had forgotten to ask you. You don't use any pesticides on your farm. How do you sustainably farm without using pesticides?
We live in a really, really good environment. And honestly, it might be very different if we lived on the East Coast with humidity and Japanese beetles and stuff. But I think you probably find this too. We have we grow, because we grow so many different plants. It's not like a monocrop, and we're surrounded by forests. So I think that we've got lots of beneficial insects and birds and things that just take care of things. I think if the plants are really healthy, they're pretty strong. I will occasionally have issues with, everybody has thrips sometimes. And I do put organza bags on white dahlias, especially like at the beginning of this season when they seem to be, everybody likes a white flower. But honestly, this is another knock wood. I haven't had that many issues.
Do you bring in beneficials?
I don't. I just kind of let nature take its course.
That's amazing. I probably in the next half hour should have a delivery from FedEx of beneficials. I have minute pirate bugs coming today to help me with our thrips, because I have terrible thrips this year on our peonies.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was telling Heather before we started recording that my pastel elegants, which are so expensive, and they're in their, I forget if it's 3rd or 4th year this year. So I was expecting some really great blooms. Every single bloom is ruined from them piercing before they even got to marshmallow stage. So I'm going to make sure I get the thrips under control. And because I'm in a neighborhood setting, I probably don't have the same beneficials that you do. I didn't think about having the national forest right there. Probably does bring in a lot of beneficials. And you have so many flowers that they are attracted to.
Yes.
That I'm sure helps that too.
Yeah, I would think so.
And then by not spraying, you're not killing the beneficials either.
Yeah.
Do you do any foliar sprays or anything like that?
I do. And the big one from last year was a great tip from you, which is a calcium spray as a foliar spray on dahlias. I had some real floppy stem dahlias, and I came to your house and yours were like steel rods. I was like, Jen, what are you doing? And well, tell us your little concoction, because I did kind of the same mix of things.
Well, I have a foliar spray, and I always caution people that, like, your soil test will tell you what you need. So I use Hybrix molasses, and I just use based on the back of the bottle how much it says to use. But I have to give all credit to Jenny Love from Love and Fresh Flowers and the No Till Flowers podcast, because that was where I first heard about Hybrix molasses. So I started using Hybrix molasses with my worm casings and my compost tea solutions that I use. And then I decided that I'd been doing some reading about what makes thick stems, and I was reading that lack of calcium can cause your stems to be weak. And as we were saying earlier, it's so windy here. And my field that I had last summer literally sits in this wind tunnel, and it was probably 35 to 40 mile hour wind gusts on a regular basis. And I couldn't afford to have them get broken and snapped like they had in the past. So I decided I'm going to just up the calcium intake. And so I got a liquid organic calcium and I followed the dosage instructions, and I have a 10-gallon home brewing kit, and I added the calcium to it, and I tried to do it weekly, but it ended up being a bi-monthly foliar spray. And you're right, my stems were so strong. It was almost a little hard in my dahlia breeding patch to evaluate, because when I shake the stems, they were all strong. It didn't fix the bobbleheads. It doesn't fix the bobblehead, but it definitely makes the stems stronger. So I'm glad to know that it's working for you.
And it's not quite instantaneous, but almost. Like if you spray one day, the next day, the stems will be hard. Well, it's really fast.
There's such high water content that they absorb that foliage. As long as, you don't want to spray it in the middle of the day. So either early morning or late at night, before the sun sets, getting that on them so they can absorb that and really soak it into the stems truly makes a difference for the dahlias.
And I've been using the same mix of Hybrix, compost tea, and calcium on ranunculus and anemones this year. And they also seem to, they're ones where, the stems can sometimes split and you can have other sort of weak stems, and it's helped them a ton too.
Yes, that's actually, thank you for saying that. That's how I first started using it for the dahlias. I was having problems with my ranunculus and having floppy stems. They would look great. You'd harvest them and then they flop over as soon as you put them in a vase, and you're thinking, this doesn't work to sell them. And so I was reading there was a calcium issue. So I sprayed them with the calcium, did wonders on them. And so I thought, I'm going to try it with the dahlias.
Yeah,
and it worked. So I'm so glad that's helping you. Yeah. We have just covered a lot, and I know that we could talk so much more. So I would love to have you back on the podcast. Maybe at the end of the season, you can give us a rundown on how the year went with all of your wedding flowers. Yeah. I'm sure that so many of our guests are wanting to learn more about you now too. How can people find you?
On the web, it's just heathersflowerfarm.com. Instagram is the same.
Heather's Flower Farm. Mm-hmm. Perfect. And we'll include links in today's show notes. And before we conclude today, is there any final advice that you would like to give to those that are tuning in and listening today?
It's not really advice, but I wanted to say sort of what I think the difference is between local flowers and imported flowers.
Yes.
And I think what it is for me, they tell a story. And so like my bouquet subscribers, I like to say that there's like a narrative to the flowers. And so when they first get them, they're in tight bud. And then they open up and they change and the stems move and they die. But a lot of things will die kind of a pretty death, the way tulips kind of twist and turn, and ranunculus too. But so over the course of a week, a lot of different things will happen in the vase. And every time someone comes down to breakfast and sees the flowers on their table, they look different and interesting. And when you get imported flowers or supermarket flowers, they're never going to look better than the day that you buy them.
Yes.
And they just die in a sad way. They don't get better. They just fade. And so if you have an opportunity to support a local flower farmer or grow your own things, being part of that life narrative is, I think, the thing that's inspiring about local stuff and locally grown.
There's something truly magical and special. And that's so true. Watching that life cycle is a really beautiful process. You get to watch the cycle of life unfold as they're sitting on your table.
Yeah. And I would also say that, the people always ask about vase life, how long things are going to last. And I think that's kind of like the wrong question. I mean, obviously it's nice if things last longer. But the fact that flowers die and that they're ephemeral is a feature, not a bug. Like the thing that's special about them is that they are fleeting and that you enjoy that beauty for that fleeting moment. Otherwise just get, silk flowers. Silk flowers, they're lovely ones, but they never have the emotional impact of something that only lasts for a short amount of time. So.
Wow, that's really beautiful. Heather, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been such a delight to chat with you. and we would love to have you back again on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's my favorite thing to talk about flowers with you, Jen. I occupy all your time because I just want to chat with you.
I know, I could talk to you for hours. So thank you so much, Heather. And until next time, happy gardening, everyone. Thank you, flower friends, for joining us on another episode of The Backyard Bouquet. I hope you've enjoyed the inspiring stories and valuable gardening insights we've shared today. Whether you're cultivating your own backyard blooms or supporting your local flower farmer, you're contributing to the local flower movement, and we're so happy to have you growing with us. If you'd like to stay connected and continue this blossoming journey with local flowers, don't forget to subscribe to the Backyard Bouquet podcast. I'd be so grateful if you would take a moment to leave us a review of this episode. And finally, please share this episode with your garden friends. Until next time, keep growing, keep blooming, and remember that every bouquet starts right here in the backyard.